don't have to keep them.
Take it away, Francisco.
Okay, so this panel, I think, is called Take Off the Rose-Colored Glasses, Why Nostalgia and Tropes Are Not Necessarily a Good Thing. And what I kind of want to talk about in this panel is the idea that adventure games, we all know, never die. But they're back in a big way now. And it seems like a lot of, well, starting with Broken Age, there's a lot of Kickstarters and whatnot that have come back, and a lot of old developers from the Golden Age, so to speak, have come back out of the woodwork and started their own projects. And some have come out, like Broken Age, and one part has come out. And some haven't, like Space Venture and other things. And then we had, well, one specifically, the Jim Wall's Precinct Kickstarter. And it seems like some games that have come out have been criticized for sticking to things that didn't necessarily work back in the day, be it mazes or, things that people have said they were figuring out as they went along. So I kind of want to talk about why we shouldn't necessarily stick to those tropes and what we can do to innovate and move away from them. So we have on this panel, of course, people who need no introduction except maybe you. But just
Thanks, man.
We have myself, Waern, Francisco Gonzalez. I made a bunch of games, Ben Jordan Games, and I've just released The Golden Lake. We have Theo Waern, he made a game called The Journey Down, which he's
Very proud of.
very proud
He
of.
is wearing a
with
game
reason
called Journey
to
Down.
be. We have Dave Gilbert, who really needs no introduction, so I won't give him one. And then we have Drew Wellman. We have Drew Wellman, who is working on a game called Automaticity, which will be published by Watchdog Games. Get to work on Automaticity. I'm a producer.
Cool. I didn't
Published
know
by me, produced by him.
Yes, which just basically means I
that.
get
By
to
me,
nag.
drawn by him.
Yes, drawn by
Yes.
him. Okay, so,
Yeah,
what do you
can I-
guys think?
Can I start by asking,
Yes.
are we talking about gameplay tropes, or are we talking about visual tropes?
We're talking about all
All
kinds
the
of
tropes.
anything and everything.
And what was what was the main question? Like, what is the key?
The main question
We're
is,
so prepared.
Yeah.
the main question
What
is,
are we talking about?
well, it's a multi-part question, I guess. The main question is, should we keep them in? Should we avoid them? And if we do avoid them, what can we do to innovate the genre and move away from them?
Yeah, I'm feeling really schizo about the whole thing, because probably like everyone else here, we have we see both perspectives, and we realize it's beautiful and it's stopping us, but it's beautiful and we love it. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Well, it's tradition versus innovation. It's easy
Yeah.
to stick with something you know, but is that thing you know necessarily a good thing to stick to?
Yeah.
It's when we first made the low-res version of the Journey Down, chapter 1 of the Journey Down, a lot of we got a lot of really good indie response, and that was all from people who resonated with the traditional. They were like people who had played the Chuck's Revenge and early Monkey games, those kind of things, and we didn't get a single one outside of that sphere, and so you got a lot for free just by looking like you're that kind of game. You get a lot of charm. It just comes there for free. It's just suddenly there. So that was a good thing to cling to, and I didn't realize how important that was. When we started working on the HD, the commercial release of the Journey Down, we suddenly lost that appeal. I mean, we got the art looked so much better, and that's why I wanted to make it high res, but we lost a tiny crowd, a core crowd, who found that there was a certain appeal to the pixeliness. I remember specifically Rock Paper Shotgun covered the first freeware release and they loved it, and then they covered the re-release, the HD release, and they also really loved it, but there was this, a little now and then, there was this, a little bit of the magic has disappeared. And then I was totally, rose-tinted nostalgia bastards, because the pixels are giving you this nice, cozy feeling. You're remembering your childhood of playing Monkey Island, and I can totally understand that. So I'm schizo about it. I don't know. But that's one experience I have with it.
It's interesting, so a lot of folks say, even though our games look old, it's mostly for budget reasons than anything else. I know what we can accomplish, I know what we can do with them, and we can get out of them in terms of sales and things like that. Going to your level would be like beyond what I'm willing to risk. It would just be.
Yeah, you're a lot smarter. You're a lot more used to these things.
But it still bothers me when I see reviews or comments saying, "Oh, it's a throwback," or "It's an homage,"
Yeah.
or "It's a love letter to old games," and that really does bother me. I mean, there is that sense of coziness with the pixels, but I don't know how much of that is true anymore because there's so much you can do with pixels now that you couldn't do back in the day. That it's an art form in its own right. In the right hands, I mean, you can do so much with pixels now that you could not do like back in the early 90s. Couldn't have made resonance back then. It wouldn't have looked the same. Wouldn't have been able to achieve the same things. So there's this sense of false nostalgia. We often like to say that we make games the way you think you remember them.
Yeah.
Because it's you look at these old games and you feel very, you remember your childhood and stuff like that, and you think you remember them a certain way, but they often were not like that. When I played these games as a kid, there was no internet. I would happily spent like 3 months trying to defeat Man and the Wizard in King's Quest III, and it was the most satisfying experience when I did it. Now I maybe last 5 minutes before going to Google and like, how do I do this? If that. And that is a reality that a lot of adventure game developers don't quite accept. They'll put these hard puzzles in games because that's what they're supposed to have, but they don't realize that you don't have to. No one has patience for these puzzles anymore, at least not the majority. When you can, I always say that if you have to leave my game and go to Google in order to enjoy it, then I failed. Yeah.
Well, it's
I want you. I don't want you to leave my game. I want you to enjoy it. And with this, that's why there's this kind of movement, especially with Telltale kind of leading that way of very puzzle-like games and a lot more focus on exploration and story and narrative and things like that. And I think exploration is the big key. That's what they can do. Adventure games can do really well. I probably used this example before. Bretislav is probably sick of me using this example because I use it all the time. But if you're a thief, I want to have that thrill of walking around someone's house and I use it in my talk and like going through their stuff and like the owner could come back at any minute. Like that is like being in those shoes. That's something that an adventure game can do. But if I'm robbing someone's house and they have some elaborate lock involving soup cans in the kitchen, which I think the seventh guest did, then that takes me out of it. That's dumb. I'm not feeling that thrill of being a thief. I'm just solving puzzles. And I think that's sort of, there's stuff that worked back in the 90s because it's the way the world was that just don't work now because of the way the world is now. There's a lot more stuff out there that take up our time and our attention, and we need to work around that and work with it. Rather. Not work around it, work with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm a lot younger than all these guys here, so I was never a lot younger.
Old man.
Yeah, so I was never a huge fan of the old school style of adventure games, especially not the early Sierra ones with the constant deaths, trial and error, designed for being played by buying their strategy guide. The thing that I did like about adventure games was the story and characters, and that's something that they still have. And so many adventure games, like the new ones that are being kickstarted by the old people, feel like they still need to have all these, confusing, unnecessary puzzles. Because that was really what they had back in the day, and all they really had to have for gameplay. We've come a long way, so you don't need mazes anymore. The thing that really frustrates me is these remakes of these classic games that they could improve the things that didn't work, but instead they add more of the old stuff that doesn't work. Like the Gabriel Knight remake. There's that one puzzle where you visit the graves of your family, and Francisco can explain it more because
Well, I kind of hesitate to call out certain games because,
I
it's
don't.
easy to criticize.
Fuck 'em.
But how many people here
It's not like we're
played?
being videoed or anything. Oh, wait.
Yeah, yeah, well, how many people here played the original Gabriel Knight Syndrome of the Fox?
Wait.
Okay, cool. So, how many people played the remake? Wow. So if you all remember, there was a bit where you have to buy an alligator mask in order to infiltrate a voodoo ceremony, and you have to. It costs $100, and you don't have $100. So on day 3, I think, or something, this guy comes in if you wait around in your store and offers to buy your father's painting for $100, and you sell it to him, and you get the mask. So in the remake, the mask costs $120, and you still can get the $100 that way, but you still need to find the $20. So the way that you get the $20 is you go to Gabriel's family plot in the cemetery, and you talk to each one of the graves, which was a nice little world-building thing that you could do in the original, but wasn't necessary. He kind of says, "Oh, miss you, Grandpa," or "Hi, Mom," "Hi, Dad." You're now required to do that, and as soon as you finish doing that, a rat or a squirrel or something runs by randomly, breaks a vase that's next to the tomb, and inside that vase is the $20.
Completely arbitrary.
That is arbitrary.
Yeah.
You would never know this without a
Is there
guide.
the intake of breath from
Yeah, so there's that. But I wanted to specifically talk about those tropes in particular, these things that we saw a lot of in the 90s games, like the mazes and the dead ends and the confusing things and the things that seem to kind of, I guess LucasArts didn't do it as much. I guess we can call it the Sierra thing. We also have the runaway syndrome, which Josue was talking about yesterday, which a lot of games also, well, I can think of one modern game in particular that was Kickstarted that was made by someone who also made Gabriel Knight, which we won't name, but we all know what we're talking about, which had a maze and which also had runaway syndrome and other things. And it was heavily criticized for that. And I wonder, well, yeah, I wonder, like, is that, why do designers still think that they can get away with these things?
I think you touched on a very important topic of you played games very differently back then, and I'm afraid some developers haven't realized this. When I got Mansion for the NES, it was the only game, the only adventure game I had in my vicinity. And I loved it, and I couldn't let go of it, and I just had to keep on playing, and there were no other options. I didn't have anything else to play. It was, well, I didn't have it.
I played that one. I didn't play any.
I didn't know that was on the NES.
Oh yeah.
Anyways,
It's great. There's no voice acting.
my point is, I spent so much time with the damn thing because I didn't have anything else to do. It was probably raining outside. It was probably shitty weather. I had no choice. So the puzzles could be horribly convoluted, stupid, and you could die over and over again, which, yes, it did happen to me. I actually did die. Not as bad as CR games, but still. And it's a completely different environment, and for some reason, I don't know why, people are clinging to this. They haven't understood the I'm going to let go of it thing.
Crap, I totally forgot what I was going to say.
Instead of listening to what I have to say, but go ahead. Yeah, those puzzles, again, very frustrating. So, some of the things...
You ready? Go on, no. Forget it again.
So a couple of the things with the game I'm developing, Automaticity, the artist, Matt Frith, is a very talented pixel artist. And like I said, pixels I don't think are a limitation. I think they are an art form that is different and unique from all sorts of other ways of painting and drawing, and they have a lot to offer still. Unfortunately, they do sort of have that attachment. Oh, it's a retro, it's a throwback. Every time I see his art described as, it's 8-bit.
Yeah.
It's just annoying. But in terms of the puzzles that are like frustrating and mazes and all that stuff, one of the things that I'm trying to do with the design for Automaticity is have no inventory, because I want to see if I can design interesting adventure game puzzles without having to combine weird things together, click things on all sorts of different things, because inventory puzzles work in sort of weird fantasy universes where you can have rubber chickens and all these other things, and just a magical map will take you somewhere. But when you take it into the real world, most things have one application, and when you start combining all these weird things, it just gets ridiculous. So that's one way I'm trying to avoid the old way of doing things. So.
Speaking of the old way of doing things, I know that one thing I think a lot of people forget is that games were so in their infancy back then. No one knew any better, which is why they included things like mazes. It was kind of coming off the arcade era where you wanted them to play as long as possible and get more value for money. Oh, it takes 100 hours to play. Oh, it has X amount of rooms. And that's not really a selling point anymore, at least not for me. You know, I've got, not only are there dozens if not hundreds of games I could nab really cheap off of bundles or for free or on Steam sales anytime I want. But I also, you know, I'm 38, I've got a family, I've got, you know, like stuff to do and, you know, all that. So I don't have as much time as I used to. And a lot of even, you know, younger people are the same way. There's too much things occupying your time and attention now, which is why there's a lot of shorter games coming out now. And I think with adventure games as well, people criticize them for being too short, but it's more that they are not doing the crap that they used to do back in the 90s that made them artificially longer. And yet for some reason, there's that memory of the game taking them months and months to play. That was because there was no internet walkthroughs. There were these long convoluted puzzles that took weeks to solve or just wasted your time. And that stuff just isn't there anymore. And also, as a developer, I know I've got talking to people from Telltale and stuff like that. They want to keep your, they want it to be just long enough that they keep your attention and you finish it, and it makes you eager for the next one. Because more often than not, how many times have you really been into a game, you can't finish it, so you stop, and then you know you're going to get back to it the next day, and then you don't, you forget about it. Because something else takes your attention. That happens so much. And as designers and developers, we're well aware of that. So we try to work with that because we have to.
I think, Dave, you make an interesting point, is the fact that people just expect this stuff. You think adventure game and this nostalgia that we have in the back of our minds, we think, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to get stuck. I'm going to have to do these horrible things. But when you take that out of the equation and you try and go for, at least I've found in my experience, I've never been a fan of puzzles in adventure games. I mean, I value story over puzzles, and when I design my puzzles, I try to make them not convoluted and based in real world logic. And one criticism that I've heard a billion times is my games are too easy. And so you take out the artificial stuff, and then people start saying, well, it's too easy. So you've got this sort of double-edged sword thing happening.
It's funny you say that.
What do we do about that?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I got a lot of, when Gemini Rue came out, I kept hearing, oh yeah, like it's a hardcore game. When it's probably the simplest game in terms of puzzle solving. It's so easy. It's like,
people just see the art style.
but people think they see the spaceships and the guns and the trench coats and the shooting, and they think, oh, it's hardcore. But meanwhile, the game itself is actually quite easy. And I don't think that's not the answer. The answer isn't to make it hardcore, but it's to make the experience itself very enjoyable. Like what Gemini Rue taught me, and I can brag about Gemini Rue without sounding too egotistical because I didn't actually write it myself. A guy named Josh Nernberger wrote it. But what it did really well, a lot of people talk about how it has this wonderful in-depth universe and things like that. The characters barely say anything. It's all done so subtly and so skillfully that like you feel all this richness. It's all there in the art and the characters and the things that are going on. It's all there without them having to spell it out for you outright. And so you enjoy exploring it because it's interesting. And I think that is where a lot of games are going now. Not about puzzles, but about exploration and about immersion in a time, in a place, sci-fi, fantasy, or what have you. At least that's the goal.
Yeah, like with those, I again do not like difficult puzzles like you say, and when people complain that there's not the arbitrary stuff, it is a bit frustrating, because adventure games are synonymous with difficult puzzles because that was the gameplay. It was a game, so it had to have this gameplay. And for puzzles that work without being difficult, I think I talked to you about this earlier, and it sort of ties into what you just said about Gemini Rue, where people think it's hardcore. You have to make the illusion of a difficult puzzle. And Ben Chandler is really good at making these where you'll be presented with a problem and there's sort of an obvious solution. And actually, the demo that you showed last year for Black Hole Epiphany, how it starts out with that, it has the same thing where there'll be an obvious thing and you'll try that and then it doesn't work. And then you think a little bit, and the second most obvious thing is the solution. So you feel really clever for having, tried, failed, and then had to improvise, and then try a second thing. So it's really, it's playing mind games with the player a little bit, and it's not exactly like making them really have to think, but making it a little bit less straightforward, click to proceed, and not so far as, you have to connect all these dots and draw a big picture and it represents the star sign that the character is born under, and you look under the Wikipedia page for that, and it's just these really complicated things. So yeah, go ahead.
It also ties into what we were saying about like immersion and exploration. You kind of like poke something and then see what it does, and then that doesn't work, so you poke something else and see what that does. And through exploring it, you kind of think, oh, I see what this does. And in the course of doing all that and figuring all that out, it's kind of rewarding. There's I think, what was it? There was a puzzle in Primordia that was like that, when there was this robot, there was this machine AI that was like hiding in a bunch of monitors, and he kept like jumping from monitor to monitor, and in order to get to like trap him in one monitor. And it was kind of, there was a little mind game he played with you that it was subtle, it was obvious, but a little subtle, that like after you went through it and played around a few times, you figured out like what he was actually doing, and it was kind of that aha moment that that makes adventure games so satisfying. But I think that back in the day there were fewer of them. What am I saying? So I can say that again, so I sound smart. Now what we have to be try to focus on making that aha moment while making the experience itself, enjoyable while not frustrating them at the same time, which is a very difficult balance to strike.
Yeah, especially when you're also trying to do a story around that.
Yes, yes.
Can I just add
No,
one?
yes.
Please.
This is not really on that topic, it's more on the topic of why did we bond so much with these, what we now would call the retro, or the golden age of adventure games. I think, again, we had to spend so much time to solve these games, to beat these games, like the original Mansion, Day of Tentacle, whatever, Full Throttle. Well, that was a short game, but my point is, it took a long time for you to get through these games, so you really bonded with them. Like, you really bonded with the characters, you bonded with the environments, you had a long time to soak up the atmosphere, so you it really became a big thing. Whereas a typical point-and-click release now, because we need to keep them flowy so we don't drop players, they only spend a couple hours on it, even though they're just as meaty as a traditional LucasArts game. And that means the players won't really have the same chance to bond with the environment and the characters. And even if a game is awesome, even if Broken Age 1 and 2 turns out to be like this really cool game, are people really going to remember it the way they remembered traditional LucasArts games? I seriously doubt it, because these other games have been gnawing and growing, and they had a different...
Well, it's just a new generation. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you done?
Sorry. Mine. I mean, you look up Broken Age on DeviantArt, you'll find plenty of people who will draw fan art of it, and so it is. They are reaching people in a different way, though. I know that with Blackwell, especially, I got an email not too long ago from someone who grew up with Blackwell. I hope that it was an ongoing series, but I know that a lot of people are really related to Primordia. There are, I'm always, especially on RPG Codex of all places, a lot of people are using Horatio and Crispin as their avatars. They really felt connections to these characters. And it's just another generation that's growing up with games in a different way. And like with anything, I think the reason why we kind of bond with these characters, not so much that we spent a lot of time with them, is that we spend time as them. And that's kind of what makes these games so powerful. Not just adventure games, but like, that's why people bond with Mario or Samus Aran or any of those characters, where you're in their shoes and you're experiencing their life. You're kind of engaging with it yourself. And so there's a bond there, especially if the game is enjoyable. And for its time, as frustrating as they might have been, they were enjoyable. You wouldn't remember them so fondly if they weren't. So there is that connection. And I hope, I don't think that's gone completely. I just think there is, there's just so much more out there that it's harder to make that connection because there's so many other great things clamoring for your attention. So it's just a little bit harder, but it's definitely still there.
So let's talk a little bit about innovations and things that we're seeing in modern adventure games that are the ones that are trying to stay away from those things. We've seen in a lot of other genres that adventure game-esque elements are finding their way into those games, but we've also seen that sort of some elements from other genres are finding their way into newer adventure games, be it RPG or quick time events, for example. Do you guys think that's a good direction to go in? Kind of bring in other things, kind of widen the possibilities, or do you think we should keep them pure and just get away pure, so to speak, but stay away from the older things, or what do we think about that?
I have my opinion on that is that it doesn't matter. I know you often hear like, oh, we have this really new mechanic. And it's really tedious to use, and I just want to do the regular pointing and clicking. Not to say that purity is all it's cracked up to be, but I do know that if you're just inserting a new mechanic just to be interesting and different, then don't. I know Resonance got a lot of praise for the long-term memory and short-term memory interface, and it was very interesting. But universally, people found it really tedious and annoying to use because they had to perform this extra step to do something that they were trained to do in a specific way. They were used to just like clicking here and talking to someone, but now you had to, this mechanic inserted this extra step, which sometimes often got in the way. Blackwell, my games did the same exact thing where you collected clues and you could combine those clues and come to conclusions, then you get another clue that you can use on someone. And more often than not, the player would make the connections themselves in their head. Like they, let's say, you hear that, oh, Joanne eats meat, but then you hear that, oh, Joanne is a vegetarian. Like, oh, wait, that's weird. So then you want to talk to someone about it, and the option doesn't come up. And in your head, you've done the work. But you don't think to like go into that other interface, connect those clues, then say, hey, something's up, and then do it. It's like, you're ahead of the character. And more, it's not to say that these innovations can't be useful. Eventually I kind of streamlined how this worked and to make it kind of a help than a hindrance. But there's a danger in like being enamored of a new mechanic to tell stories when it really can get in the way. You don't really need to improve how a book works or a movie or anything like that. What it does, it works fine. What I do want to see is better stories and more ways of immersing you in something rather than finding a cool new way to present the adventure game. More often than not, it doesn't work. I don't know. This is my experience.
Well, I'll let you guys chime in, and I have a follow-up question to that. But you guys?
Yeah, those things with those new interfaces and systems and all that are trying to abstract the way the player thinks, and like you said, it only creates distance between the intuitive thing. Like motion controls in, there's not many adventure games with motion controls, except like Zack Wiki on the Wii, but it's doing an extra step between thinking what you have to do and it happening on screen. Because buttons is just intuitive, and point and click is just, we're used to it, we know it works. So that is an extra layer of confusion that is probably usually not worth it. But this is an interesting quote from Ron Gilbert. The other,
No relation.
The other Gilbert, he's some other guy. But he says, I miss verbs. A few years after Monkey Island, verbs started disappearing. All we were left with was use. But it always felt like something was missing. You get additional puzzle solving and humor opportunities through verbs. So, as you all probably know, Ron Gilbert is part of the new Kickstarter. What's the title? Thimbleweed.
Thimbleweed Park.
It's definitely a throwback to Maniac Mansion. And I would like to ask you guys what your thoughts on the interface that we all use, the left click to interact, right click to look. A lot of people think it's too simple.
You go first.
Yeah, we actually dumbed it down even more, because we realized from the start we want to do this on touch. We want,
Yeah.
so we just have one single tap, and I think anything other than that is insane. I'm sorry guys, but it's stupid. So 2 buttons, I can, okay, that works. But go beyond that, that's just, bleh. That's me, that's my opinion. There you go.
No.
I agree. I know that there's this a very weird thing I've noticed with anything that takes you out of the experience and like makes you wait. And I've noticed I've asked a few developers about this, and I asked one of them today. I think they might be here, so apologize that this bothers me. But a lot of adventure games, so many modern ones, especially like 2.5D adventure games, have this really weird thing where you click to move a character and they slowly walk. So you double click and they run.
Why not just run?
Does anyone ever actually want the character to use walk? No one ever walks. And I don't know why so many games do this. Just make them walk faster or naturally I don't know why they do that. And that's another tradition thing. Like, often I ask, and that's just the way it's done. That's just the way they do that. And like verb coins, because of the way Full Throttle and Curse of Monkey Island did it, you click for the verb coin and then it slowly fades in. So you have to wait this couple of seconds so you can choose which option you want. And it's like you need to be like quick and immediate. And so the one verb icon, or just like right click to look, left click to use, is quick and immediate, and it gets you in there and immersed as soon as possible. Anything that gets in your way of the fun, I say this a lot, if it gets in the way of the fun, it's wrong.
Yeah, go the hell away.
Yeah.
Go the hell away.
Yeah.
I didn't really like the Full Throttle UI, but one thing I gotta say was awesome was the boot.
Yes.
There was a boot, and that was
Gemini
awesome.
Roo had that too.
Yeah. Boot. Yeah, that's cool. So I forgive UI boots, but everything else.
Yeah, it's
The verb coin itself isn't a bad idea. It's just when it slowly fades in.
Yeah, that's insane.
yeah.
But
I can't even stand that in Windows. I have to disable the
No,
animations.
but I think they suck anyways, actually. Because always, when I click on something, whatever it is, any adventure game, when I click on something, I know what I want. I already know what I want when I'm clicking. I want the character to do whatever's the obvious interaction. I know that's what I want. I don't want to have this
I
silly
know,
layer in between.
Sometimes I like looking at something and getting a description.
Well, that's what we do. We do that often in the journey down. The first interact is probably what we're going to guess the player wants to do. The second interact will probably be a commentary. And it works. You get used to it very fast. It makes so much sense. So the first interaction is going to be what the player probably expects is going to happen on the first interaction. The second interaction is going to be what the player probably expects is going to happen the second time. It's just so much simpler.
I guess it depends on what
The object is, especially if I see a character, I'll often want to look at them and get a description and see maybe I know them, maybe I don't, maybe they're suspicious. I don't know. I often would want to look at them before I talk to them. But
Okay, all right.
Yeah, but see, here's the difference then. Our characters are a lot bigger, so we don't have this, it's a character that looks like the character that it looks like.
But that's bad writing. You don't want to do that.
That's horrible. That's horrible, but it's everywhere.
I've
It's the
obviously-
door.
Yeah, no, we don't do that. But I see if obviously we've opened up a can of worms
Yeah.
on this interface thing. No, and I want to talk more about it. But before we get into that, I
Yeah,
just
you
want to get the tail end of the second follow-up question I had about immersion and relating to QTEs and things like that. What about games where you have to say, perform the action of opening the door instead of clicking on it and having your character? There's certain games where you can go.
I wonder what that that game could be.
I don't know. It's
Jason!
it weighs Jason.
Jason!
Anyway, what do we think about what does that work for immersion, or do you think that's just a
Well,
gimmick?
what's funny is that I think adventure games are the only ones where if you watch a trailer for an adventure game, they're so proud of a character picking up a cup. And it's like they'll animate this beautifully, but no other game or genre cares about that. And most every AAA game, you walk to a door and open it, the door just opens and you walk through. No, adventure games you have to reach over and open the door and you walk through, like everything is animated. There's just something about adventure games that sort of makes you do that, everything has to be seen. And I don't think a lot of that is necessary. So I think that like it can work, like when you, I assume you're talking about like Heavy Rain kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, like the gestures and the little
It-
thumbstick waggling.
I mean, the problem with Heavy Rain is that
Well, one of the problems.
one of the problems with Heavy Rain is
Sorry,
that like,
David Cage. I know you're watching.
yeah,
No, don't do that.
David. I love you, David Cage.
is that the gestures you do, there's like mechanics, press A to do, to brush your teeth. And I get what they were doing, like it was very, boring activities around this really nice house with a really nice family. And then like in the next scene, you're doing the same nice things in a much worse situation. And I get what they were trying to do. The problem is that the actions you were doing really had no context. And like they were not the same, like, okay, you're moving the analog stick to do one action, and then later on you're pressing, the shoulder pad to do a very similar action. And there was no consistency. It meant nothing. It was just do this to keep the game going.
Yeah,
and
there was
that's the problem.
One in
That was
particular,
the problem with that.
one in particular instance where you had to like use the R shoulder button to shoot a gun, but like it's not always that. So you'll use R for all sorts of things like opening doors and talking to people, not talking to people, but like yeah. And then one time it shows up where it's like oh pull a trigger, it's like oh I shot a guy, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't like the motiony. It's just not intuitive. They think it makes sense after it's done, but it's not what you think to do before you have to do it. So it's like, oh yeah, that does sort of look like, wax on, wax off or anything, but it's not the first thing you think. What was the can of worms we opened previously? Interfaces?
Interfaces
Yeah.
are all like this, like about.
Yeah, you got all angry.
I do every time.
You don't like look, do you?
You don't like to.
Well, here's something interesting that I found, because I've jumped around with interfaces quite a bit. I mean, I made 10 games with the Sierra icon bar. I made 3 games with the Sierra. Yeah, I made 3 games with the Sierra icon bar. Then, following that, I decided, hey, let me add an extra talk icon for small talk and for questions.
Good measure, huh?
Yeah, instead of simplifying, I complicated. And it made me realize, when you have a character, how many, unless you're her crabbiness, you're not going to touch everybody that you encounter. You're going to talk to a character. You might
Look,
look
you
at
said
them.
that assuming everyone knows.
Yeah.
Her crabbiness is a former Let's Player who is famous for doing questionable things with, like if she plays text parsers, she goes and she kisses everyone and see what their reaction is. And if she can touch anyone, she touches everyone.
Experience yourself, kids.
So yeah, so it became very apparent to me that this wasn't working, but I wasn't going, just out of tradition and out of getting roped into doing an episodic format, I didn't change the interface. Now I swear by the right click to look and left click to interact, but even now I'm starting to see the cracks in that system. I had someone playtest Shardlight a couple of weeks ago, and they wouldn't look at anything. And it really surprised me. Like, to me, it just seems natural when you go into a room, you right click, and there's some puzzles that give you hints when you look at things. You look closer at things. And I had to tell them, I was like, you're not looking at anything, that's going to help you solve the puzzle. And I started wondering, well, maybe there's a better way to do this. I've talked with a couple of people about potential different interfaces, and I'm really intrigued by the idea of a Sim-style sort of pop-out context-sensitive menu. Like you just one click on something, and if you can only look at it, I think actually the Gabriel Knight remake did this. You have the thing, you can only look at it or whatever. You have like, a couple of other different possible interactions with it. And it it's a one-click interface, but it's not so dumbed down that it's just one click will automatically do just one action. So
I was really impressed with how
Gemini Room looked very clunky, because, yeah, it's got the verb coin, but it's immediate. You click on something, boom, pops right down.
Context menu.
It's not context, but you have all the icons there, and it's surprisingly like quick and easy. Especially I noticed on the touchpad. Like you press it, and then it appears like right below your finger. So then you can just go like you press something. Oh, I want to interact with that. Oh, I want to look at that. I want to talk to that. I want to kick that. And it's very quick. So I guess it varies. Are we still on the topic of nostalgia now? I guess we're talking about
a specific
the
way.
Sierra.
yeah,
the
that's
Sierra.
the old Sierra or all of it. Because what was interesting about LucasArts is that, I mean, Sierra kept that same interface for the majority of their games.
Well,
LucasArts kind of, with every game they did, they tweaked a little something. Because Maniac Mansion had, I think, like 12 verbs or something like that. It had-
Push and pull.
Yeah, push
Open and close.
and turn on and turn off,
Yeah.
which I think you used once. Monkey Island, the original, before they did the VGA version with the 9-verb interface, had turn on and turn off. You never used turn on or turn off in the original Monkey Island. It was just there. I mean, even the early LucasArts games had.
So it could turn off sun, and it gave you a funny response.
That's right. That's right.
That,
yes.
it's
Maybe
a
one-
comedy game. So
Right,
it's humor
exactly.
and
So
all
you
that.
have that. But the original, like Maniac Mansion and Zack and Kraken, didn't even have a look verb. It was the what is verb, which you would use to hover over the screen, and it would define your hotspots. But you couldn't look at anything, and you couldn't talk. It wasn't until Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade that you could talk to other characters. Monkey Island was the first game where you actually had choose your own dialogue. And we think back about these games, and we think, oh yeah, LucasArts, it's all about the funny dialogue, but you didn't get that until Monkey Island, which was 1991. They had already made like 3 or 4 games, you know. And then, you know, moving on, they kind of refined the verbs, and then they started with the verb coin, and then they went to the Grim Fandango tank controls, and with the, you know. But, well,
Well, have you
Schaefer
read-
calls it
what
the
they
tank
call it,
controls.
One thing.
So yeah, they went kind of innovating. Sierra kind of did, but a lot slower.
Well, we are forgetting one thing important. A certain interface that has not yet been mentioned. The text parser.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, of course.
Who here has opinions about text parsers? Anyone?
I think text parsers are very tricky to get right.
They taught me how to type very, very fast.
They taught me how to type very fast too. I mean, I played the Hugo trilogy when I was a kid. Those things are why I can type fast, although I still just peck at the keys with my index fingers. But yeah, the text parsers, I mean, you have to think about the complete, just the infinite number of possible things that people are going to type in. So if you, some games were pretty good about anticipating and kind of having not just I don't understand this response, but you get a lot of games with crappy text parsers that just say, oh, I don't know what that is, and it gets really limited.
It must have taken a lot of testing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to make sure, to catch all these things.
Well, there's also,
Everyone's trying.
yeah, there's the famous story that Al Lowe has told about when they were testing Leisure Suit Larry. I think they had some sort of, not procedurally generated, but some sort of algorithm or something that kind of gave, it wasn't like they sat and wrote every response. I think they had something that, I don't know, it generated random responses or something. And they were play testing it in a room, and he was asking people to just like type in, or suggesting someone to type, and someone went, oh, type in masturbate, and he typed it in, and it gave a funny response that they weren't expecting, and they were like, oh, wow, this is great. So,
So what you're saying is adventure games need more masturbation.
that's not what I'm saying, but if you want to interpret it that way, then that's your, how are we?
I probably want to ask the
Yeah.
audience for
Oh, yeah,
questions.
yeah, all right, let's open it up to the audience. We'll go in order.
You guys haven't mentioned Myst-style games. How would you, is there anything worth criticizing there? Because I think they're very fluid. Good the job.
In what respect?
We talk about like the first person view.
Interface.
Oh.
I think it can work. I honestly, I kind of missed that whole era because I had
That's no fun intended. You missed
because I was in university at that time and I didn't have a computer that could run it. I loved Grand Inquisitor. I admit that like a lot of first-person games kind of make me motion sick, even though those are very static. I find them kind of they can be very quite lifeless in many ways, and I miss talking to people, and you don't get a lot of other characters in those games, which is why I generally don't like them myself. Excuse me. Of course, I've got the microphone in my face when I do that. So I personally am not a big fan of them, but obviously, you know, they did really well for a long time, so I'm the minority of this.
I'm going to go even further and say that I don't consider Myst and the Seventh Guest adventure games. I think they're puzzle games with the story kind of tacked on, but I don't consider them adventure games. I mean,
And, you know, that's...
they're purely about the puzzles, which is fine. That's a great genre, but yeah. But as far as the interface goes, yeah, I mean, I never actually played Myst, but like with the Seventh Guest, you kind of had sort of context-sensitive things here. Like there were things you could look at and some other things like that. But yeah, I mean, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, I derailed. But you guys, or well,
So, because all this streamlining and simplifying of puzzles, isn't there also the risk that it just becomes a big interactive fiction where you just don't click next but click on an object and the same happens, so the player doesn't actually do anything anymore?
That is the extreme, and that is the line, the middle ground that you have to walk.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge. You don't want to make it boring, and you don't want to make it. It's more that I guess the best way to describe it is that you want to make the player feel like they have agency, where the story, the events don't happen unless you make them happen. And again, it's like the Master Thief example. It's more creating a feeling and evoking an emotional kind of response because you are doing something. Not necessarily that you're solving a puzzle, but you are physically performing an action. Going back to Monkey Island, for example. I mean, everyone remembers insult sword fighting. Everyone remembers rubber chicken and a pulley, because those are things you did. Not everyone remembers like a specific piece of dialogue or something like that, but they often remember the actions they did within the game because that evoked some kind of emotional response. Either I did that, or hey, that's kind of cool, or that's kind of funny, or this was neat. It evokes something because you performed those actions, and that's what can be very powerful, and that's kind of what I think more modern games are trying to do more of.
Yeah, anything to add?
So,
would I be, and this is sort of touching on Kat's question, would I be wrong in thinking that looking back at 20 or 30 years of history in games, and not just adventure games, basically all games, that games are sort of dumbing down, getting less cerebral? Is that something?
Played it, Theo. I don't know. People have been saying that for so long. I'm sorry. Did you finish your question?
Yeah, that was about it. Yeah,
I
what
totally
are your thoughts about it?
All right. I think that yes and no. In terms of like you'll always get like the big dumb games, less cerebral stuff. But then of course you've got like the indie revolution that's still happening right now. I mean, Braid is, I can't get past the first level. It's really, really hard. But yet people praise this game. I mean, what is it, Spelunky? Very roguelikes. I mean, FTL, I spent like a month and a half trying to just get to the end of it. And it was very, very challenging, and I was playing it on easy. I'm thinking you get both of them, of course. I don't think games are being dumbed down so much. I think just what people want and expect from games is changing.
Can I just add a little something?
Sure.
The games were never that intelligent, really. I mean, especially not adventure games. They weren't very stupid. They were difficult, but they were still very stupid. I mean, you look at the original Monkey Island games and original Leisure Suit Larry text input, they were really, they were stupid games. And you didn't have to be intelligent to solve them. You had to be boneheaded.
Yes.
Spend a lot of time with them.
puzzles.
Yeah, so I mean, no, they're not more stupid now. They've just always been kind of dumb.
it's funny you mentioned Spelunky because it just occurs to me that I think probably one of the only other genres, or at least another genre, that latches onto nostalgia is the platformer, because you have this whole wave of people who are making these really hard platformers from the old school of just like, you know, Mega Man and you know, play a Rayman game. I swear Michel Ancel all the time, but not to derail that.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because it's, I often, why can't I talk? You will often hear that, oh yeah, like, you know, Ratchet or adventure gamers are kind of holding on to the past, and there's all these retro platformers. You play these retro platformers, you play Super Meat Boy, and they spent so much time fine-tuning these controls. I mean, it is, you move this character, and if you fail, it's because you did it wrong. It's never because the game did it wrong, or, you know, like, the controls are like, you know, you stop on a dime. They're so fine-tuned, they will respond to your actions. It's because you suck. It's not because the game sucks. And that's what kind of makes it fun and challenging. It's like, these were so fine-tuned. These aren't just banking on nostalgia. They've spent a lot of time and effort into this game. And those are the kind that succeed and people take notice of.
I think we had some more questions.
Yeah, also connecting a little bit to dumbing down or evolving with the times, and it's obvious that you have different views on like verbs and how these systems are changing. So I want to ask you, what do you guys think about, what do you consider with new kind of adventure games that are sort of streamlining it to the point where you don't have an inventory like Machinarium or Earwolf, these kind of things? Are you considering working with those kind of things in the future?
I've actually always, especially after my talk yesterday, I always wondered if I could write a game without any dialogue. That's what, like, Machinarium is beautiful and it tells a great story.
Me too.
I've always thought of trying it. Maybe one day I will. I haven't yet.
Yeah.
We'll certainly save on
my
myself.
game.
Oh, they want to make a mind game. Awesome.
It'll have verbs, just there'll be pictures of mime things.
Well, actually, an adventure game from the golden age that didn't have any inventory was Blade Runner. You picked up clues, but you couldn't use them. They were, you know, you had all these objects you were carrying around.
Yeah, it was
It wasn't an, well,
it was
I liked
really
it.
weird. I really loved it for the ambiance.
It was an interesting experiment. We'll
Yeah,
say
Yeah,
that.
that's
fair
fair
enough,
enough.
fair enough.
But I mean, even still, like, yeah, I came to the realization after working on the game for months that in the Golden Wake there is approximately one puzzle in the entire game that involves inventory combining, and it's sticking an antenna on a Toy Street car. There's no real, you know. I feel the same. I would be interested in trying a game that didn't have any inventory.
Yeah.
What was that? Okay. Yes.
You were saying earlier about only in an adventure game you would animate someone picking up a cup. If you remove that kind of animation, you remove the animation of going through a door. Do you say there's actually no point in having a walk animation because you can see the room and you can click on everything from a single point? And at what point are you then into a missed game where you don't actually need any character
Obviously,
animation?
there's a
Well, it does have a point though. Like a lot of adventure games, like if they didn't have all the fancy stuff, you could speed run them in about 30 minutes.
The same could be said about any game, really. It's more like, I think, oh my God, I forgot his name.
It's all about the
little guy
presentation.
yesterday.
Josue.
He was talking about how they spend a lot of time animating this waitress like leaning against a wall, and if you call her, she slowly turns around, does a very little sexy walk, you know, leans over the table and says yes, and it's this like 10-second long animation. And that's something very common in adventure games. I know in my favorite game is Discworld Noir, and there's this really long, slow animation. There's this hulking troll, and you want to talk to him, and he kind of like slowly like stands up and gets into the standing position. And no other genre does that, like, or even thinks this is something that would be okay to start with. And they just don't think to get rid of it afterward. And it's just something adventure games seem to do, and
Well,
I don't know why.
It's all about the presentation and about the immersion. Like, you know, you don't want to just speed run the game just to complete it because there's no reward in, you know, a game without any difficulty. If you take all that out, you miss the story, you miss the characters, you miss the feeling of being in a world. So those are important.
Well, I think we probably need to wrap
Well,
up. But
let's ask Rob, like, let him do his
Oh,
question.
right.
'cause-
Long question. I was just wondering what your guys' thoughts on. There's one game that I played in the last couple of years that struck a chord with me. That's got the kind of adventure game kind of elements that changes, but is very simply mechanically. Is Little Inferno. And I'm just wondering what your kind of thoughts on that kind of? Is that a new version of the adventure, or a new way to storytell, or what's?
Well, I didn't tell you
Little
what the
Inferno,
I can tell you.
because, I mean, it's kind of obvious that they made this mechanic and then added the story on top of it, sadly. Yeah, I mean, it's cool because you play through this game and you burn a lot of stuff and you make combos and then you get little bits of story. I mean, it was kind of cool, except that it's more that the story is kind of revealed to you as you play instead of you actually making it happen. I just watched my wife play it. I don't know the story myself, so I can't really comment on the story. But I'm really not the person to answer this question. Sorry, because I haven't really played the game. I've seen it being, and that song is like stuck in now. That song is stuck in my head. Which
I had a burn, baby, burn. Disco Inferno. You know that's.
But well,
Disco Inferno.
one final comment to add to Matt's question is yeah, walking is funny because walking is one of
your
those
question
things.
is done.
Well, just my last point before we
Move
end
on.
this.
You're stuck in the past, man.
Yeah, I know, I really am. Walking is one of those things that's funny because it can be tedious and it can take forever, but you miss it if it's not there. Willie Beamish, I missed walking around the house.
Voice acting, same thing. Like when you do tests and things, most people they'll maybe listen to the first few words of VO and then they'll skip through. They'll read it, and when they finish reading it, because you read faster than you listen, or rather you read with your eyes faster than you speak, they'll click through it. So they rarely listen to all of it, but remove it, they'll miss it. Same thing, yeah.
And with that, we will remove ourselves from this panel.
Can I just?
Done.
I just want to.
No. Let Theo have the last word. Let Theo have the last word. You can drop the mic on these things.
This is important for me, all right? So everyone listen. How many here are you like adventure game developers, like people here? Some of you at least? Yeah, there we go. So I want to challenge everyone, and I want to challenge you guys as well, to try designing a game, just once, a little small thing, with one-click interaction in mind.
Like,
and you will
say,
notice.
like, I am on the fence.
Yeah.
This is something me and Matt have been talking about, whether or not to have that right click.
Right on.
So you're gonna have to convince me.
Right on. You will notice immediately once you start designing.
It's here
this.
till Friday. You have Friday to convince him.
I'm
You
here
will
till
notice
friggin'
that it's gonna blow your mind because it's so much better. You will notice immediately all these other interactions. They're stupid. Throw them out. You don't need them. Try it. You too.
Now drop the mic.
Try it. You promise me you're gonna try it at some point? Come on, try
At
it.
some point I might. I make no promises.
I'll try it myself.
Do
And
it.
I have to take off the mic before I
For that, thank you very much.
Thank you
Actually,
all very much for coming.
Yeah, there will be a half-hour break now or so, and then we'll be reconvening in here for Ali's Tavern Quiz. And a couple more demonstrations at that time, and then Dave Gilbert shortly after that, giving his survival guide
Oh, what's that? What's that?
to one-click interaction games.
Sanity survival guide, basically full, like keeping your sanity while doing this full time.
Right.
Waiting for the last presentation.